staying at the local youth hostel. $38 a night seems to be about the cheapest place in town, but very, very nice private room. Shared bath and toilet, but I can live with that. This here's what the youth hostel looks like from the outside. This here is where Sergeant Preston of the Yukon makes his home, in the local RCMP headquarters. This here's the Gold Rush Inn, where we're going to go have breakfast. We're now going to go over to the SS Klondike and check her out. Distance.
Here and all right, folks, just crowd on in. Here. And welcome everyone to the SS Klondike. My name is Andrew and I'll be your tour guide. If you have any questions along the way, just try to give me a shout and I'll try very hard to answer your questions. For those of you who have seen the video, you'll know that the SS Klondike was the largest of the ships that traveled the Yukon River between Whitehorse and Dawson. She's 210 feet long plus the paddle wheel, and fully loaded only draws 40 inches of water. The boat on which she's now standing is actually the SS Klondike 2, because the first SS Klondike was built in 29, but was holed and sank in 1936. However, they salvaged all the machinery and most of the superstructure above this deck and launched the SS Klondike 2 in 1937. So that's what we have right here. This is the boiler, and it's the heart of the vessel. Excuse me. The fireman was the fellow who had to stoke the fire, and he stood right on this platform and threw a log in at a rate of about 1 every 30 seconds. Not a pleasant job, and because it was such hard manual labor, they only made him work 4 hours at a time. There were 3 firemen, they had 4 hours on, then 8 hours off. And to tell you the truth, this log right here isn't exactly a typical log. Our Yukon trees tend to be more 6 or 8 inches in diameter, and this one's a tad larger than that. But in any case, still a log, even a 6-inch diameter log every 30 seconds, it's pretty hard work. Just follow me down to the other end of the boiler. Take a look down these tubes, you can see a light at the end, and that's the open door of the firebox which we just left. So these tubes are continuous with the firebox, and when the big doors are closed, the air is drawn through the tubes and up into the smokestack. And as it goes through the tubes, it heats water which surrounds them. Now these tubes would get pretty dirty with all that fire and ashes coming through, and there'd be a buildup of soot. So it was also the fireman's job to keep them cleared out. And he'd have to punch the tubes with a wire brush at least once every trip. As well as having the hardest physical manual labor job on ship, he also had the dirtiest.
How many firemen were there at the same time? 2 or 1?
No, one at a time.
Definitely not a union shop.
No. Just follow me down the cargo deck. As you come down the cargo deck, take a look at this cargo. It's a typical cargo going downstream to Dawson. See, there's milk and eggs, butter, lots of beer.
Butter, cat and
Yep. Normally the boat is fill the alley.
Firemen use it that needed it.
And this pile of wood right here is 1 cord. It measures 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet. It would be consumed by the boiler in less than an hour. the open door and hope for the best. Follow me into the car, into the engine. Do we have anyone on board today who's an engineer, a steam buff? Some people look really knowledgeable back there at the boiler room. Boiler. No? No one? Well, lucky today, eh? Okay. The steam comes through this large pipe from the boiler, and this valve splits it into two streams and it goes into the two engines. Each of the engines is capable of 525 horsepower, and they move the pitman arms which turn the paddle wheel. Of course, the engineers down here in the engine room can't see the way ahead, and the captain's up in the wheelhouse and can't control the engines, so they had to have some way to communicate. And this telegraph system was the primary communication. The captain's orders register on this arrow, and when the engineer has followed the order through and the engines are doing what they're supposed to be doing, he'd line up the two arrows for the message to go back up to the captain that the engines were doing what they were supposed to be doing. If anything happened with the telegraph system, there's a backup of bells and gongs, which you can see up there. There's also a buzzer system. We believe there was also a voice box, a voice tube system. We haven't located it yet, so we think there was one, but we don't know where it is. There were 7 deck hands that worked on the cargo deck. There was also a deck boy. They had their accommodation just over here on the starboard side. On the port side is the engineer's workroom, the fireman's cabin, and the only showers on board. So take a look around. If you have any questions, just give me a shout.
Did you say 70 deck hands?
No, 7
7
deck hands. And this smaller one up here is the hydraulic steering. Hydraulic tiller.
Pumps down here?
Yep, that's a condensation system of condensation pumps. Yeah.
Okay. They were condensate boilers.
Yeah, well, they tried to save as much of the steam as they could, recycle it.
Yeah.
Just hand boiling. Accumulation of most little bit.
Yeah.
But it didn't go very fast.
I suppose not.
No.
Machinist och engineering.
Yeah. That's some motor.
Yeah.
The second class were usually miners and trappers and prospectors and woodcutters that were just traveling partway up or down the river. They didn't do the whole trip. But if they stayed overnight, they slept right here on the cargo deck if they were men. Women and children had a small cabin on the upper decks, which we'll see in a minute. So just follow me down the deck. You can see there's some furniture there on your right. Everything that went down to Dawson had to go with the 4 months of the summer season. This stack of wood right here is 3.5 cords, and when it was rough going upstream, using the winch and all the machinery, this could be consumed in an hour. Kinda makes you feel bad for the firemen, eh? could only carry about 10 or 20 cords of wood on board, and it took 40 cords to go downstream and 120 to come back upstream. So they had to stop along the way to wood up at wood cams. It was the deckhand's responsibility to load the wood. They put a gangplank up the bank and take a trolley like this one, load it up with about a third of a quart of wood. This weighs 800 pounds. Then the deckhand would navigate down the gangplank and turn it so they could follow this alley. There's only one deckhand manipulating this trolley. There's no brake on it. So just use your imagination to imagine if you got it going at too much of a speed and didn't make the corner. Right through the other open cargo door. Most of the cargo you see in the cargo hold will be going downstream to Dawson. It's groceries and living goods for the people. However, coming back upstream, their cargo was ore. They carried Galena ore from Stewart Landing, at the end of the Stewart River, right up here to Whitehorse, and it was carried in these sacks. Each one of these sacks would be filled with 125 pounds of galena, and galena is a base metal of silver, lead, and zinc that can't be processed in the Yukon, so they had to take it south. In Whitehorse, it was transferred to the trains, and the trains took it to Skagway, and from there it was loaded on the big boats, and they took it south to be processed. And this was the payload for the ships going south, and it was what kept the shipping companies operating. And when the road went through to Dawson in 1952, put the shipping companies out of business because the trucks carried the ore. We're going to head up now to the upper decks. As you can see on the SS Klondike, first class passengers traveled in style. Right here we have the observation lounge. On the port side, this small cabin was for women or children traveling second. There were only a couple bunks because they didn't expect great numbers of women or children to be traveling second class. On the starboard side, you can see the porter's cabin. And the porter was the fellow on board with paperwork. He was responsible for bills of lading for the cargo and passengers' tickets. And when they stopped at wood camps along the way, he went out and measured out each cord of wood. He was a pretty busy fellow. You can see he even has his bed in his office. So menu on this bulletin board, another one around the other side. If you want to have a look at that, then just follow me into the dining hall.
Is meal included in this tour?
Yep. Oh, no. No, it's included in the ticket.
Oh. Well, I gave you a ticket.
If you have a look at the menus, you'll see that they ate really well on these ships, and everyone ate the same food. First class, second class, officers and crew. The only difference is where they ate it. This dining hall is for first class passengers and the officers if they dressed up in full dress uniform. Of course, if after a 12-hour shift they didn't feel like getting all dolled up, they had to eat in the crew's mess. We'll see that in a minute. But through here you can see the galley, and the waiter station's on this side, from which the steward served the first class passengers.
They must have pretty smooth water.
Yep, they did. There were no waves anywhere along the ship. Once you've had a look, you can just follow me out on deck and we'll look at the first class staterooms.
On the deck.
Hi, Mom. Everything on board the ship has been restored to the 1937 to 40 era because that was the height of steam on the river. First three cabins are first class staterooms, and the fourth cabin is the cabin of the mess boy and pantry boy. Right here we have the sun deck. It is the only place on board the ship where first class passengers and second class passengers were allowed to mingle. There's a little staircase over here on the starboard side, and the second class passengers could come up from the cargo deck. Right to the stern you can see the meat locker. And it was placed there because the breeze was coming over the deck, the paddle wheel turned enough to walk through it. These two bathrooms combined kept the meat from spoiling. Right behind you, you can see the cruise mess through that door and the galley through this one. Second class passengers ate in the cruise mess after the crew had eaten.
Deep freeze.
I have no idea.
The cruise mess is here. It's right here. This first cabin here was shared by the two cooks. They lived right next door to the bakery. You can wander down this hallway and look at both the bakery and the galley, and here we have the pantry.
Loaves of bread and pies and cookies and eggs. Wow.
Excuse me.
The water which is flowing by us is, of course, the Yukon River. It originates just above Whitehorse at Marsh Lake and flows 2,000 miles to the Bering Sea, north and then west. Actually, this is the cabin of the chief steward. Although he did perform any religious services necessary, he was in charge of making sure the first class passengers were comfortable. He made sure that their rooms were clean, their beds made, and their water jugs filled and their slop buckets emptied. But despite how busy his schedule was, he managed to find enough time to sell cigarettes and citronella as a byline to make a bit of extra money. You can see them right beside his bed and on the shelf over his bed. And right next door to the chief steward is one of the 4 washrooms on board. It's the only one with a bathtub, and if a passenger wanted to have a bath, it was a really big production. The steward would come in and draw the bath, and they had hot water, but they used river water and didn't filter it. so it was really silty. And they'd have to let the water settle out for about a half an hour just to get the silt to settle to the bottom. Then they put a towel down on top of the silt to hold the silt down. Then the passenger would get in. Of course, after a half hour, the water was probably cold. Down too much, then come out dirtier than you went in. There's the bathtub.
Extra charge for it, or do they pay you to take a bath?
They just said, don't bother, it's not worth the trouble. We're going to head up to the wheelhouse now. The second flight of stairs is pretty steep, so if you don't want to come all the way up, you can just wait on the Texas deck and we'll be right back down.
Texas deck.
I don't know if it's hooked up right now. I know that it only turns so far. But this cable, which just winds around there, goes directly down and along the ceiling of the cargo deck and down to the rudders. This is for the searchlight, which you can see right out front. See the white box? That's the searchlight. And this one turns it from side to side, and this one turns it up and down. But they aren't hooked up right now. Come on in, everyone, crowd around. We have here, of course, the wheelhouse. Although the wheel wasn't used for the most part because it's really hard to turn, especially when you're going through rough water. Sometimes it took 2, 3, even 4 men to turn it. They just used a hydraulic tiller, which is what this is. If something went wrong with a hydraulic tiller, pull this ring and it releases the hydraulic tiller. These other pulleys are for bells and gongs to communicate with the engines room, and here's the other half of the telegraph system. These 2 smaller wheels are for the searchlight, which is just out front, and they used it in the spring and fall when they were traveling at night. They would flatten tin cans and put them along the river, and they were reflectors. Of course, they didn't need it in the summer because they had 24-hour daylight, but in the spring and fall, if they were traveling, they used the searchlight. And up here is the steam whistle, and this is an electric light, which is on top of the wheelhouse. This white canvas windbreak was necessary because the captain had to keep 3 windows in the wheelhouse open at all times. It was required by law so that he could hear other ships coming, because parts of the river are really windy and narrow and they can't see the way ahead. They had to be able to listen. So it got pretty windy in here, and this sort of channeled the wind up and over his head. With the wind and the lack of insulation in the walls, it got pretty cold in here. So they have an airtight wood stove and also a radiator. There are only 3 rooms on board the ship that are heated. It's the wheelhouse, the captain's cabin, and the pilot's cabin. So they tried to keep the boss happy and warm. But the rest of the people just had to wear long johns. You can see there's a compass in the corner. Again, that was required by law. It didn't have any practical use on the river. Just stuffed it away in the corner where it was out of the way. And up here is the 48-star American flag. They carried an American flag and they flew it on the 4th of July with the American passengers. And also if they went far enough downstream, they'd end up in Alaska, so they could fly it there too. Is there anything else you see that you're curious about?
What's over your head, that handle?
It's a steam whistle.
Oh.
And when we come outside, or when you're off the boat, you can see how that string goes up the whistle. Pull it down, the whistle goes. Yes, this is about the highest building in Whitehorse, with 4 stories, so if you see anything there you'd like identified, it's probably the best view you'll get.
Is this the actual tiller?
Yep.
What's this one?
This is for the searchlight. This one turns it sideways, and this one turns it up and down. That's the white box just out here.
What's this for?
That's a tiller. It's like the power steering in your car.
snooze there,
It's a lot easier to turn.
Like the tiller on a sailboat.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to turn than this is easy.
Well, and it was,
Not right now.
it was activating the same rudder.
Yep. Yep, just this was had
That's
extra power.
right. In old movies, it's much more romantic to have that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
the other
when you
movies,
move
you never
when
see
you
all
move the
those
tiller,
chains and
and
everything.
this would move too. Not now, but it used to.
Well, I just followed the rudder, I guess.
Yeah.
Where does the hydraulic pressure come from?
There's a pump down in the engine room.
Run by what? Steam?
Yep.
Or-
Oh yes, everything's run by steam on this ship. Yep.
There are a couple of little generators down there, aren't there?
Yep, and they're run by steam too. That's for the electricity for the electric lights and also the searchlight. Probably open. I'm not sure about Sunday, but if you're here tomorrow, certainly it's open. This place, our library is open that way.
One of those little buildings, that one.
The pale blue one is the hospital, and the stuff that's built out in front of it is the new extended care facility, which hasn't opened yet.
Large.
Yeah, it isn't quite as large as it looks. It's sort of a long, skinny thing that's in front of the hospital, but it is quite large. I think 100 or so beds. No, not that many. Maybe 50 beds.
What is the population of Whitehorse?
21,179. So,
Oh, they haven't updated the sign.
what does the sign say? 20,000?
20,721.
Inflation.
Is this it's tourist
Maybe it's a
season?
tourist. Is
Yeah,
it?
it's the students that are home for the summer. So they treated the captain well, as I said.
What's that radiator from the...
From the boiler. Paid $40 a month. The fireman was paid $85. The engineers were paid, I think, just about $200 a month. The captain was paid $300 a month, and the pilot also. About the same.
$300 a month. In those days, it's pretty good money. Huh?
Yeah, we figured that out to be about $6,000 or $7,000 a month nowadays.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that's not bad pay.
So for 5 months, he had it made. Eh?
Make good money. At $1,500.
And also just in the 30s, so any
Sure.
job at all was a good job.
Oh.
There was, yeah, no, they had to write an exam of some sort. And they wrote it outside in BC, I believe. Other than that,
Turn around,
no, I don't think it was
These stairs are...
too much of a, they have to. Well, most of the time they work their way through the ship from deckhand all the way through the bay. By the time they got to skipper, they threw the ships inside out and around and out. Yeah. The SS Klondike only ever had 2 skippers in her whole history.
Wow, I guess there's no reason why. He wouldn't come back to it. No.
Isn't that pretty?
Guys want to see right here?
Why don't they served all those years with their heels?
It's like they're coming.
Nice sunshiny day to sit out here.
Helen?
Again, is the SS Klondike.